I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's it?
Good afternoon, Mr. McLaughlin and Chairman of Silver Touch Pension Plan. We want to welcome you to the Public Accounts Committee, and we also want to thank you for taking the time. So we know that you retired people are really, really busy, so we accept that, you know, it's a constraint on your time. So, and this is, we're dealing with the multi-year reports of the Government Pension Board that were published through their website a couple of weeks ago. But because it's a multiplicity of years, we were not going into each report in detail. So what we're looking for is a more global position and looking at the governance structures and a couple of the things. And invariably, a couple of questions may come up on the COVID-19 emergency relief because everybody else has introduced it. So, but that's just frame, and it's not meant to be adversarial. This is the first time we've had an opportunity to look at these reports as the Public Accounts Committee. So we're trying to set a foundation on which we can build, and we're looking for a cooperative, collaborative aspect of getting the best possible pension plans in place to the people that we represent. So.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may say, I obviously, whenever I'm framing my responses to you, I need to be cognizant of the two positions I potentially held during the period that you're questioning here. You have to understand I may have to make a statement to you as a representative of the National Pensions Board because I was on the board during the initial terms of these reports. If you're asking me a question as the Silver Thatch Chairman, that would be something that I guess would be framed in the framework of the regulator, which in our case would be the Office of Labor and Pensions, if they had put some sort of query or response to us. So I have to be cautious in terms of the way I make my comments, because I need to make sure that the members understand the text, the context in which I am making such a statement.
I think we can give you some comfort in that we are only looking here this afternoon for your representation as chairman of Silver Touch. Okay. We don't envisage any situation in which we would have to delve into the board chairman because we haven't invited the other board chairman of the board. What we did there was dealt with the administrative staff because one of the things that we recognized in looking at it that this kind of thing could happen, and there were people who were intimately involved with pension plans who may have sat on one of those boards at interim periods, and we wanted to avoid that conflict at all. So we've tried to deal with the admin arm of the DPL, and we've had them in first, you know, and right now what we're interested in hearing from you is about Silver Touch pension plan.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I want to also indicate that much of the framework that Silver Thatch has, we were one of the first pension plans to actually have a website. And in fact, many of the functions that our members can or need to access can be accessed from that website, including statements and queries and all these type of things. Now, unfortunately, I will also have to preface the fact that if you're going to talk about something in extreme detail, that obviously would not be my remit because as the board chairman, I'm not dealing with the day-to-day administration, dealing with members directly, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's appreciated. Okay, the first question, the answer, just give us your full name and your title, and that is simply for the record so that it will appear correctly in the record. In other words, if there's any mistake in the way your name is recorded in pronunciation-wise, it's yours, not mine. Outside of that, I'll invite Mr. Chris to lead us off with questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also, Mr. McLaughlin, for coming here today. Just to briefly expand on what the chairman was saying, is that the purpose that we're looking for this, well, these sessions is more for information purposes, public education. It's not meant to be adversarial or anything like that, but due to the fact that many of these reports has not been released to the public since the 2008 financial crisis. we think it, and with the recent changes in legislation that give people an opportunity to access their pension funds, there have been a lot of public interest around in pensions. And, I mean, straight off the bat, and I think I can say this for all committee members, is that we're all supportive of pensions, but we believe that there's still a lot of misinformation and a lot of awareness that should be out there that's not out there. And what we're looking for from these sessions is to pretty much help to educate the public, give them a better understanding of the pensions, the pension providers, and the infrastructure that we have in place that manages pension. So it is in the vein of more information to help the public and not anything to drill into why you did this, why you did that, or anything like that. So just to set the stage, and this is what we're looking for from that standpoint. So with that said, and going back to your earlier statement with Silver Touch being one of the first companies, just to kind of give the public a brief idea in terms of what is it that Silver Touch represents in terms of their vision, their culture, their risk profile, you know, their mission, in terms of, you know, what is it ultimately that they want for the employees, and how best do they think that they can achieve that? And in your opinion, you know, how you think they've been doing in terms of achieving that goal that they had set out originally when they started? And that's pretty much what we're looking for. So, floor is yours. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I think it was clear from the very beginning that Silver Thatch, and by the way, I also want to let you know, I was also a founding trustee of the Chamber of Commerce pension plan, served a term there, and then also after that became a founding member of the Board of Trustees for Silver Thatch. So my relationship in the whole process has been very long-term. I was also part of the committee that was created with the initial implementation, or I shouldn't say implementation, the initial establishment of what the law was going to look like in the first stages. So it means that my background has been involved in pensions from virtually the time when this whole idea of having it in Cayman has been processed. Having said that, it was very clear from the beginning that Silver Thatch wanted to be different in terms of this marketplace. But like anything else, if you're a business person, you want to ensure that you provide a product which your public appreciates is different. And if they see value in that, then they obviously would attract, you would attract them to come to you. And I think one of the things that we've always gauged ourselves is as part of our, it's not monthly, probably I guess bi-monthly meetings that we would get, because we meet 7 times a year, let's say, as Board of Trustees. One of the reports we get from the administrator is how much money moved from another plan to us. And that has always been one of the ways that we can identify whether we're doing a good job or not. And I can safely say, with the exception of maybe 1 month out of the 15 years that we've been here, we've always gotten more money coming into our plan than going out to other plans. So that suggests to me that we must be doing something right, and that there is an appreciation of what we're doing is valuable. One of the things that we introduced from the very beginning was the concept that we wanted to be as technologically advanced in terms of the presentation of the product to the member. Because one of the things that you have to remember is that most of these people, this is the only money they may have. They don't save money. They're paycheck to paycheck. So this forced savings needs to be managed properly to get them the best benefit. And one of the things that we've always prided ourselves on is that we believe, and of course the problem is not having all the statistics available in the public domain, we believe that, for instance, our expense ratio, meaning how much money comes out of that dollar that is invested, goes to the plan and its service providers, is the lowest on the island. So when you measure your production in terms of you're getting more business than the other people, you're continuing to have very good investment performance, you're giving the customers the lowest expense ratio. We have always given quarterly statements. I mean, the law only requires annual. We have always given quarterly statements, and those are actually available. If a person signs up and goes onto our portal, he can actually get it monthly if he so desires. So the premise is that we have tried to be the pan to provide people with as much transparency as possible, so that if they are interested, and that's obviously the biggest problem, if you are interested in knowing what's happening, you can get all the information you require. The unfortunate thing is, you go to an annual general meeting, and we may have, I don't know what the number may be, 18, 19, 20,000 people, you get 24 people showing up. So, you know, it's all good and fine to say that we have all of this information, but whether the public is really using it is hard to say. But again, as I said, because we're measuring ourselves with, listen, we're getting a lot more money coming in that's going out, we keep monitoring that to see, listen, we must keep improving and so forth. One of the things also that we have done from the start of the beginning is that we were the first to implement a program where the risk profile of the member was taken into account as to where his money was placed within the strata of multiple investment strategies. We recognize that a person who is young, single, and making a fair amount of money can have a higher risk profile than a person who's 10 years from retirement, doesn't make a lot of money, is married, has a bunch of children. So we have developed what we call the life cycle program, where we have five different platforms, and depending upon where you are in a matrix, depending on marital status, income level, and age, you move within the boxes. And once you move in the boxes, then there's a gradual switch over. So when you're very young, you'll be into the more aggressive investment platforms, and then as you age and make more money or mature, you move to the more conservative ones. Now, as I said, that has been a strategy that's almost been in place now, maybe going almost 20 years. So it is proven. Now, after we did it, there was many others who did follow, but we've always taken the attitude that we want to try to bring to the market the best, least expensive professional management of funds. We have been criticized sometimes that, you know, the guy who's making the small amount of money doesn't get what he's thinking he's getting, because he's looking at that, well, what did you do for me this month? And we try to educate on the fact that, listen, this is not a month-to-month thing. It is about what are you going to do when you retire, and are you building your platform so that you'll have money when you retire. But as you all can imagine, there's still a significant portion of the less affluent population who that's the only thing they look at. How much did I make, or how much did I lose this week? All right. One of the things that I think we've only had 2 administrators per se over the life of our plan, and basically that was a morphing from one organization that actually was, you know, they had other financial services, and then they morphed to just a company that only does plans. So for all intents and purposes, you can say we've been basically with the same administrative team throughout. We have a second service provider who is responsible for receiving all of the investment documentation and prepares the NAV for what is the value of a share at the end of each month. And also they prepare the financial statements to be provided to the auditors. And then finally, we also have a separate group of people who has also over time has been changed, I think maybe twice or 3 times, is the investment people. And in fact, we also have undertaken as a board over the life of our time, and I think we've done it maybe 2 or 3 times, getting an independent consultant to reevaluate how well those investment people are doing compared, for instance, to the universe of what they see, because obviously they're maybe doing work in many other countries. So of course we're isolated here in the sense that we just to have. Difficulty with that, of course, is that our pension regulations are very prescriptive, and they have been simply from the very beginning to ensure that, as one of my colleagues would tell me, the foxes don't get in the hen house. He wants to make sure that people just not taking heavy risk in the investment field, because that's how you can make more money, but it's also how you can lose a lot more. And so our strategy has always been to have a steady climbing return, and we've proven that. I mean, over the times we have charts that we show, as well as when we do presentations, et cetera. And one of the things I think that has always been the challenge is that many of the members don't really choose their plan. Even though the law says they do, in reality, it's mostly the employers who choose. And that's not how it's supposed to be, but that's the reality. Let's not talk about what it should be, but that's the appearance. Now, of course, you can have very good employers who actually shop. They will actually go out and shop and find the best deal for their customers. But then there's other employers who just say, listen, I'm with these guys, and that's it. You don't have a choice. Some of the larger employers, for instance, may have multiple plans. They don't even have, there's nothing in the law that says that you only have to be with one plan. If you're an employer and you have the administrative resources, and like, for instance, with Silver Thatch, you can do an electronic filing. You can just fill out the names of all the people, how much they need to contribute, file it electronically, and send your check in online to the bank. So, from that perspective, we try to make that as easy as possible. And it's just an Excel spreadsheet. There's no fancy portal that you need to go in. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. You fill it in, you upload it, and it goes in. But that's always been some of the issue. The other issue is we get tarred with the bad brush of some of the other organizations, where people say, well, yeah, but I get charged, X amount of money just for making a deposit, whereas ours are geared on percentage. Theirs are geared on a flat fee. And I've always said, listen, if you do your shopping homework, you should recognize that if you are a person who's putting in a large sum of money, a flat fee works out better for you. But if you're a person that's putting in a whole bunch, and you're only putting in $50, and your flat fee is 10, you're probably not going to be making much of a return with that plan. And I've spoken about this on the radio a number of times, how much it sinks into people because of the thing I said to you about the employers, I think, dictating. Sometimes, even if they had the knowledge, they're not in a position to make the change. Okay?
Thank you very much, Mr. McLaughlin. Earlier you mentioned in terms of investment, you guys have a separate investment committee, and how is that selected?
No, it's not an investment committee. Basically, we have a completely separate investment manager.
Okay.
So their only job is to go out and seek the investments and place those investments. What they do have to do to the board is they have to submit to us fact sheets and historical information about the organizations to which they wish to invest the money. And they have to be able to meet the criteria, because you got to remember now there's a lot of derivatives, for instance, out there in the marketplace, and of course the law doesn't allow for that as part of it. So we have to be cautious to know that the funds that they're actually asking us to invest in, because we don't invest in individual companies. I guess I should have said that. We're not investing in individual companies. We're always going to be investing in companies who themselves are mutual funds or hedge funds or otherwise that do investment. And we have to obviously balance the equity versus the fixed income that the law requires, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, they have to submit, okay, we have 5 different platforms. Each of those platforms may have 30 different investment companies, but they're not all, those 30 might not be in every platform. Maybe because of the nature of this one might be a higher return bond fund, that doesn't work too well if you're in the conservative group, for instance. So they will have to give, but they don't, they will say come up with a universe of maybe 50, which they have pre-submitted to us. And then we would say, yeah, let's review those and see what those are. And they're also obligated once a year to sit down with us, and these guys are supposed to monitor these investment platforms on real time. So if if an investment platform is quote unquote going rogue, they know for a long time before it gets to the point where we've invested in that. They check on things like, is the investment manager leaving to go work for another fund? Is one of the most senior investment analysts, is he now retired? And all those things will put that company on a watch list, in which case they will be watched and they will be a regular return. Now, they do that as part of all of their sort of institutional customers demand that. And we're nothing really more to them than a very large institutional customer with special demands, in the sense that they can't just buy anything they want. They have to buy things which fall within the criteria of the law. So we ourselves, as the board, receive those reports. We also get compliance certifications each time we meet that says, yep, we met category A, category B, whatever the law says that we have to do, they have to certify to us that those things have all been met during the course of the month.
Thank you very much. In terms of employees, how many employees do you have, I guess, administering the
Well, that's hard to say, because remember I told you we have all of these various agents. So, I mean, Saxon, who's our administrative agent, I can't tell you how many people, but there may be 8 or 9 are dedicated specifically to us. Then we have Chartered Trust, who does the NAV. Again, they're a big, large organization, but I'm not sure how many dedicated people they would have to our organization. Of course, there would be 2 head people that will report back to us, but they know what the work is that they have to do, and they go from there. We also have employed, in the last couple of years, a corporate secretary type person, because what we were finding is when we were at board meetings, the administrator was the one doing the secretarial work, and we're like, well, maybe we might not talk about them sometime, so let's go get an outside secretary just to maintain the minutes and the records for the plan.
Thank you very much. Do you have, like, in terms of your members that took advantage of the early withdrawal, do you have an idea or a ballpark?
I was looking at it, because obviously we've been trying to put together, and I mean, there's a lot of misinformation that people have as to how soon these things can happen, because they don't realize that NAVs are only really calculated once a month. And so if you happen to be a person who, and there's a certain time frame that you have to apply before that month end to be able to catch that month end for the purposes of your redemption. So if you apply, and let's say for argument's sake it's 5 days before the month end, you will get that month end. But if you happen to apply the second of the next month, you gotta wait till that month end's NAV comes up, because they're not creating NAVs daily. And see, that's the misunderstanding. The NAV is happening monthly. So part of the reason for the whole 45-day thing was to allow the time frame for the funds to basically collapse the money they need to sell off what is required to be able then to submit to the people. So at this point, I was reading that numbers were somewhere in the region of 100, 125, 130,000 that we've already liquidated, and we've already got, they give me statistics of how many that are already ready, that are ready to get checks, how many are already ready to do bank transfers, and so forth and so on. And then I think there's probably 15 or 20% where they don't actually have the necessary information to distribute the funds, because the person doesn't have either bank numbers or anything like that. You can't just give a check to somebody.
Sorry, just for clarity, how many, like, roughly customers you said had applied?
I know the number was about 130 something million, and I'm assuming if, let's, for the sake of argument, if you divide that by 10,000, that's what, 13,000 people? But it could obviously be more, because not everybody would get the 10,000, et cetera, et cetera. Some people would get more, some would get less. But I do know the last numbers that I saw. I haven't, unfortunately, gentlemen, I must admit, I have not been as active recently on the plan with the details as I was in the past. You can understand, I also run a business that's been heavily hit with trying to keep its head above water. So I find more of my time being devoted to that, and I do get little snippets of, okay, guys, we're working on this, yes, we put it in place. So the information I'm giving you is off the cuff in terms of what I remember. Obviously, if you went to their administrator, they would be able to tell you, okay, I got X number of customers, this number, that, da, 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 da.
That's fine, but 130 million, that's fine, because that's more the number. We're just trying to get an idea in terms of the cash that probably would be coming out.
Yeah.
So 130 million, that's fine. We're not going to hold it to exact
Yeah.
number.
Well, I do know, because you see, the difficulty we have also is you have to remember that not everybody's entitled to the same amount. Some people, you can only process X amount of applications on a particular day. And then you have the next batch that you do, and the next batch you do, and the next batch you do. And I do remember when they did the initial analysis, because we also had to go back to our in this situation, we had to go back to our investment people and say, listen, guys, you know, this is going to be what's going to be required. You need to also work out, because you're also going to remember, even though the law allows us to be out of the parameters, if we do it because of market influences, we just have to be back into line when the market comes, you know, have a plan to be back. But when you have this kind of redemption, you got to make sure that you don't throw yourself out of kilter, because you need to make sure that the rest of the people who are staying in, they are within the framework. So there was a lot of discussion and back and forth and planning, and it had to be done with the investment managers to say, okay, this is what we believe we're going to need to liquidate just based on initial, you know, inquiries, etc. But we can't give you the number until we actually get the people processed. And I know there was initial number done, and then they had to come back and say, okay, yep, now we've got a more final number, we need another 20,000. So that may have mean 20 million. So that means maybe it's 150 million now. Because I think in the 130 may have been that initial number and another 20 when they did the final. But I think from what I last saw, that may be, you know, there may be squibs and, you know, dribs and drabs coming in after that, but that's basically the main bulk of the people.
You can go.
I have a couple of more global questions. We were informed on Wednesday that there are sections of the 2016 legislation that have not been commenced, and that there are investment regulations which should have accompanied that legislation, which would have allowed some greater flexibility and opportunities for plans to get better returns for the period.
Yes. Well,
In absence of those sections of the law that are not implemented and those changes in investment regulations, is that presenting any difficulty for you in terms of getting the best possible returns for the pensioners that you have in very secure stuff?
Of course, Mr. Chairman. We have said from the very beginning that because of the constraints that have been put on the law, there is only a certain amount of income you can generate from that if you're going to maintain that conservative nature of what it is. For instance, there's a lot of people say, well, you can't invest in gold. No, you can't invest in land. You can't invest in a lot of other things that could have maybe potentially in certain environments made you a lot more money. Now, one of the things that we have also been criticized for is that of use of hedge funds, and people have got a misconception of what they are. What we have done is we've used hedge funds to be a buffer, to allow when market conditions are such that they are going down steeply, we can show you every single time that the market has gone down steeply, our plan has gone down less than the others. The reason is because these hedge funds are, they sometimes call them contrarian. It's a technical term from the investment people, but what they really mean is that they don't necessarily behave in the same way that the whole market behaves. So if you've got part of your investments in something that's not going to go down as fast, then you're not going to lose as much money. Now, obviously, the disadvantage is when markets are really escalating, we're not going to catch up. But believe me, more of my members are more concerned about how much they lose than the fact of how much they didn't get.
Yeah.
All right? So and if you look at our growth pattern, it's always been that sort of steady upward path. And even 2009 crisis, I mean, within a couple of years, we had some other plans who lost 50% of their value in the 2008 crash. I think our number was 20-something%. Now, if you think about it, if you're down 50 even if you make 100% back, you're still only back to where you were. If I make 100% back, I'm actually ahead of you. So by not losing as much money, it means that I don't have to be as risky and still make a better return than you do. And one of the things that was concerning us is that some of these other plans, we were of the opinion, and I will say it, we are of the opinion that they were not necessarily following the rules. Because if they had been, there was no way that they could have made the returns they said they did. But that's not for me to judge. That is for the department to assess and go from there.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Harris.
I just want to pick up on that point that the witness just made earlier on. When we talk about risk profiles. You know, in broad terms, as you just said, most pensioners don't care for the most part, you know, what their pension earns month to month. Unless, of course, they're nearing retirement or there is a new and improved government withdrawal grant up for grabs, then they start caring a great deal about what their pension earnings are.
Correct.
And as you've also pointed out, we've started to see, particularly against this COVID pandemic, losses. Quarter 1, 2020, I think pension funds have lost so far upwards of 15%. 2018, we had what I self-style the triple threat, Trump, Brexit, and China slowdown, where pensions lost about 6%. And then, of course, 2008, the financial recession, where they lost considerably more. And whilst most pensioners aren't necessarily stock savvy, they do know enough to understand that trades in the stock markets can go either up or down, and when they go down, sometimes the downside can be really ugly, 50% losses and the like. You mentioned earlier on that you have been in this pension realm since the beginning, and I can certainly vouch for that statement. I don't know if you recall, but you and I had a conversation many moons ago as it relates to investment profiles, and in particular what pension funds may or may not invest in, given the otherwise conservative stance that most Cayman pensioners prefer. You know, you had some of your younger pensioners who have the time to play in commodities and say, yes, you know, risk a little bit more because I'm looking for bigger gains. But in broad terms, and you can agree or disagree, most pensioners want or prefer slow and steady. They want a conservative investment that makes a reasonable return that isn't exposed to too much risk. Once upon a time, we talked about ways that we could limit that exposure to risk by taking, if not all, part of those pension investments out of the stock market and perhaps investing in local instruments, whether they be real estate or infrastructure. And at the time, you said to me, which is something I've never forgotten, it stayed with me, that pension funds would love to do that, but there is no mechanism or conduit that a pension fund, Silver Thatcher or otherwise, can invest in real estate, can invest in infrastructure funds, because it just doesn't exist.
Well, and also to provide liquidity when a time like this happens, that can I get the money back out?
Quite
So we
right.
can always get it invested. That's not the big problem. The big problem is we need the members of parliament as well as members of the public still don't understand that it's all great and fine that we can invest in that, but that investment needs to be liquid enough that when there's a call, such as there is today, that money could be pulled out again. Now, if we had put some of the money into the infrastructures and so forth that you're talking about, where was that money going to come when it's needed now to be able to pay back out? Because they're not interested in shares of the infrastructure fund. They're concerned about cash. And that's always been the issue. We only have 2 or 3 companies in the entire Cayman Islands which are listed on the stock exchange, which means if you need to liquidate them tomorrow, they can be done so. And that should always be the criteria for a pension plans of this nature. Now, having said that, can we, we were a $500 million fund. Can we put 20, 30,000 into something? It's fine. But you see, the problem we faced was that our members are going to say, you can't be putting 40, 50, 60 million dollars of this into illiquid assets that I can't redeem them out when I need to. Because you've got to remember, this is just one of these isolated situations. But we have to redeem regularly. People leave the island.
Unless we stop giving opportunities to redeem until you get 65. If that was the caveat, if that was it, then you would be safe in those investments because the money is 40 years down the road.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
Yes.
And to that point, Mr. Chairman, I want to just pick up on, because he's absolutely correct, and I agree with the chairman, and I've said so from the floor of this House and elsewhere. Pensions are a forced savings for tomorrow. You know, any withdrawals right now, whilst they will help, and I'm a member of the government who, you know, supports the present support, but I do believe, and have always believed, that it represents short-term gain for long-term pain. For those pensioners who are now appreciating that their pension assets are largely invested in stock market trades, and now, of course, they're paying attention to what the stock market is doing because they're seeing the losses on their pension statements. And they're worried about what money I will actually have at retirement. I wonder if you, in your experience, can certainly state to the pensioner who's listening, if you're worried about your pension value today and what little you have to withdraw today, from a pension administrator standpoint, how significant of an impact, positive or negative, will the present withdrawal of either 10,000 or 10,000 plus 25% have on future values when the very same pensioners who are today waiting on their pension withdrawal, what that value will look like come retirement?
Mr. Austin, it's scary, and I'll tell you why it's scary. If you go back and look at the Mercer report, which was printed, must be 15, 20 years ago. Well, there's one before that. We're not supposed to be putting in 5 and 5. We're supposed to be putting in 23% in total. So we're already behind the expectation of when the law was written. It was written in such a way, and the plan was that a person would have 80% of his final salary available to him at retirement. Now, how you going to get to that when you're putting in 10 when you were supposed to put in 23, I don't know. That's number one. Number two, every time we have an annual general meeting, we create a chart with 3 things on it, and we dare our competitors to put their numbers up against it. What is the cash return over any period of time that you want to put? What is the government CPI over that period of time? And what is our return? All of those who say, I won't lose my money because I put it in cash. Well, suffice it to say, sir, that you get a 1/10 of 1%, I believe is the going rate now for cash. Even if Silver Thatch loses a little bit now and gains it back over the time, it's still going to be better than 1/10 of 1%. The difficulty of giving you a proper answer is because each pensioner has his own perspective. The difficulty we have is that many of these people are very short-term. And we're talking about the people, there are people that argue that we shouldn't even have the expatriate population involved in this exercise either. Whereas I'm saying, well, the more money you have, that should create less expenses for the overall value. So that's the reason why they contribute. And worst case, as the chairman pointed out, they can at least get their money when they go out. A Caymanian shouldn't supposed to get his money out till he gets to retirement. That's the whole purpose of it. Now, and there was also a way, there's this, the term is just escaping me, AVCs, additional voluntary contributions, which technically was where these extra monies should have gone into if you wish to withdraw them pre-retirement. Because that should have been where you had those extra funds. So that this withdrawal you're talking about now, sir, should have only been allowed for the ABCs. At least in my humble opinion. And some people say, well, you're biased because you work for the... I don't get anything out of this thing. And my funds, as well as my other fellow trustees, are also with the plans. We believe you have to have skin in the game if you really want to have something to be able to say. So, yes, they'll say, look at me, say, oh, Mr. McLaughlin, you live in Vista Del Mar, you have all these things. I didn't start like that. But it meant I had to put my money aside, I had to have a plan, and unfortunately, most of these people plan is, and I agree, they have children they have to take care of, they have a house to take care of, they have food, and they don't make enough. Well, that's just gonna compound everything we talked about. They're not putting in 23%. They're withdrawing it now. They're, changing jobs, and as soon as they get their 2 years, then they can take it out from the other pension plan, even though they're still here. We spent at the National Pensions Board, now I'm going to talk as a National Pensions Board person now, spent probably close to 2 years trying to look at all the little ins and outs that had come up and cropped up after the law had come in place and was in place for about 10 years. And there was a myriad of different things that were never envisioned that needed to be addressed. And the difficulty is that you can't appreciate that until you're the person who's affected by that particular clause. And so therefore, a person who's younger, as you mentioned, is able to take longer risks. He's going to be in the workforce for 40, 50 years. So a little 10 or 15% this year and an 18 or 19% next year, he's fine. But the guy who's next to retirement loses the 15. He doesn't have the time to make it back up. And those are the people I believe are running scared with this program. And they're thinking, oh, market's down. Well, I can tell you that the market is back above what it was pre-COVID in many ways. So although you say you believe it's down, it's already regained some of that already. So by taking the money out now, you're basically consolidating your losses. Because you can't, you've said, I'm taking those losses. If you had left the funds in there, and now they've recovered a bit, you've now been able to recover some of those losses that you didn't have to take. And I guess it's hard for people who, as a country, are not savvy stock investors like, other countries. That's just, people just gamble in the stock market as a matter of course. Our people are not like that. Their traditional investment opportunities is cash and land. And that's the only thing really they understand in many cases. But the point being, sir, is that you cannot put everybody in the same basket because each person's perspective depends on how much money they make. Again, comes back to my life cycle matrix we use. How much money they make, how old they are, and what's their marital status. And we take that in consideration as to where we place you in our investment platforms to try to meet the returns that match your profile or risk.
I thank you for that comprehensive answer. I just have one final question. It's a question I've asked of all the pension providers. As chairman, I don't expect you to know the answer, but certainly we also hope that the information will be forthcoming because I believe that information will be important to the final PAC report. When we look at the present COVID withdrawal relief opportunity that's on the table right now of 10,000 or 10,000 plus 25%, first question, how many of your pensioners have chosen to take advantage of this withdrawal opportunity? And secondly, of those who have taken advantage of this opportunity, which of the two options have they chosen? I don't know if you have that information, terrific. If you don't,
I mean, I would not have that information. Obviously, my administrative agent, who's dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, would be in a position to tell you up to date exactly how many of each one you had.
the committee would be satisfied to receive that at a later
Exactly.
date. And
Well,
Chairman,
I was going to say, I mean, there's no reason that the superintendent pension, as part of their regulation, shouldn't just request that directly. Because again, you have to understand, it was somewhat difficult for me to come here today, because I didn't know under what basis you were actually asking me these questions. Simply because as a private, non-government organization, I don't believe I'm subject to the ombudsman's activities. I don't know. It may be. It may not be. And also, as a non-government organization, I'm subject to regulation through that pension office. Again, any of these type of questions you're asking should be automatically available through the National Pensions Office, because they should be in a position to supply with that, sir. Because that is part of their job and part of their remit as to what they're supposed to be doing with the plans.
I have no more questions, but I certainly thank the witness for his comprehensive responses.
Let me try and answer, see if I can fit in how we get, the fact that there was a report from a government agency that was published. We have, as a Public Accounts Committee, we have the necessary, to use one of the modern terms, bandwidth,
Yes.
right? And one of the things that we wanted to do was to enhance the discussion of pensions. And we felt that having this forum for these 3 days where we gave each of the people the opportunity to come in and explain, and some people are listening. In fact, I'm surprised at the number of questions and texts that I get during the later part of the evening when people have actually listened. So I think if nothing else happens out of this COVID exercise and this reporting exercise, is that I believe the level of individuals' concern and interest in their pension is going to be increased a lot.
Mr. Chairman, I really hope so, because I have been, the difficulty I have to put myself with is that sometimes people will say, oh, you guys are too harsh here and you're too harsh there. What we have as a plan, our vision, if you wish, is that, I'm sorry, there are certain situations where we have to protect that public person from themselves.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I believe that sometimes their emotions are played with. They are given a fountain of misinformation. The number of people I heard talking about this whole thing with certain things, and then when I spoke to some of my staffers, I employed people myself. I said, well, do you realize that if you still continue to make your contribution, all of this now becomes ABC? Which means you can withdraw it at any point. But it means you have to leave your money in there and be there with the skin. Now, of course, again, back to the member's point, my staff are not people who are unemployed. So they're going to have a different perspective of this than somebody who is. And so therefore, there is no way to give an absolute answer for each particular person. You would have to stratify them into relevant groups, and then you would be able to come up with your strategies or your cost-benefit analysis for them.
Okay.
But a person who's like, and I think as you all have said, if you're a civil servant, why do you need, you're already employed, so why do you need more, why do you need money coming out?
Well, that's why we prohibited it for them in the legislation. But I have another question. We're trying to get and we believe we have extracted the necessary commitments from the Department of Pensions and Labor Office and the chief officer responsible that the reports are going to be up to date by the end of this calendar year. So I just want to ask you if you're aware that all of your statutory obligations in terms of reports to the pension office regulators for 18 and 19 is up to date. If not, I would just like to check on it and make sure
Well, our
it is.
year end would be June, you see.
Yeah,
So we're really talking about 2019.
right, so
Yeah, because basically the statutory requirement is 6 months after the end of the year, it needs to be completed. I mean, we would have done our AGM in November, and as far as I know, you see, again, Mr. Chairman, it all comes back to the point. If such obligations have not been met, then I would have expected that the regulator would have sent me a request saying you're not up to date, or you haven't done this, or you haven't done that, and we would address it. I mean, we have actually been, we believe, somewhat overzealous in our reporting to because as I told you before, even though the law requires, allows us to go out of the boundaries if it happens only because of market fluctuations,
Yeah.
we still report it. We still report it and say to them, listen, we know we are out, but because of the way that you're doing your redemptions and the way you're doing your new subscriptions, we will, by the time we will be back square. So we believe that we're actually reporting more than is required, but we're not aware of any lack of information or other requests that haven't been answered. So
Yeah.
if they were, then it really is that department who should call the mayor and say,
we
listen,
appreciate,
yeah.
but what we're trying to do here is what a former governor used to tell us, belts and braces around
Belts and
it.
braces, yeah.
And we're just asking each company to try and make sure that their reports are in on time, because I don't want to come back and come October, November, December, DPL can say, well, we can't do the report because this one company hasn't sent in their report.
Well, I hear you, Mr. Chairman, but it's sort of like with SEMA, with the banks and so forth. If a particular bank or other organization hasn't completed its obligations, SEMA will issue, and I was a chairman of SEMA at one point. You issue an injunction against that organization and get them to do what they need to do. But it shouldn't hold up the overall regulatory framework that you're trying to implement.
Yeah, because a report that leaves out a company because it hasn't submitted is in itself still a report.
Yes, yes.
All right, well, any
I
other
think-
questions?
And, Mr. Chairman, you also have to remember, although there is quite a number of quantity of plans that exist out there, many of them are reasonably small because they may be single employer and
Yeah.
things like that. But you're really literally talking about 6 plans, I think it is?
The ones that we are concerned about, of course, in most cases, is the multi-employee ones. The single ones, we have to keep an eye on them too, but they are not as important in terms of the wider community and the support. So, but thank you very much, and, oh, sorry.
So I just wanted to close off on something, because one of the things, to some extent, Mr. McLaughlin, you are right, in the sense of the regulators do have a job to play in terms of what it is that is expected of them. But equally so, as you see more and more across the globe, the question has always been asking, who's watching the watchers? And the easiest person, so if, say for example, you had a normal regulator, you would have raised your issues with the regulator sends a report here. If the regulator report left out what it is that you said, then how would we have an idea what should have also been in the report? And it is to expand on what the chairman said, where that bandwidth comes in. Because ultimately, if we were satisfied with what was in the report that was actually submitted, then it would have answered a lot of questions. It is the lack of information inside the reports where, because at the end of the day, all the government entities at the end of the day is still, to some extent, empowered through this legislative body. So while we may have delegated some things, ultimately, as the elected representative of the people, that responsibility still doesn't pass us. So I think one of the cultures that we need to change here, and this goes back to, and we found it in the DLP, and I've been sitting in the National Pension Board. It's one thing where you have people with your skill set that would recognize certain investments and everything else. But then from listening to some of the employees that, in terms of the management within the DLP, we had to ask ourselves the question, when you look at some of the complexities of these investments, should some of this be registered by SEMA? Should it be managed by SEMA? Should it be looked at SEMA where there's a more requisite skill sets in terms of a $2 billion worth of pension funds that we have? So it's one thing, it's okay to have labor inspectors, and it's a good thing to say if people are complying with pensions. But then there's an aspect of the law where, yes, everyone is signed off by auditors, but the regulator still has a job to say, wait a minute, are all of these investments, as you just rightfully raised a while ago, did they comply with the law? And based on some of these returns that some people would have had, you yourself would have questioned it equally, so some of us would have questioned it. And it is from having these kind of conversations where, and that's why we said from get-go it was never meant to be adversarial, but rather informative, because ultimately we all serve the public. And in this situation here, this is the one law in terms of, one of the very few laws that is strictly for the benefit of the employees, where to the different pension providers, they'll be there for their customers. For us sitting here, they're our constituent, they're our people. And anyone must expect reasonably that the minute you're taking something from the public, whether it be their services or the food or whatever, ultimately, someone still has to make sure that their interests are protected. No, that's why we do our regulators, but at the end of the day, for us to properly evaluate the regulators to say that they're also doing their job, it would be almost next to impossible without even having some input from the people that they're regulating. And that is more the vein in which we were looking at it. Because one of the things that we, coming up from this exercise, and you touched on even additional voluntary contribution. One of the earlier witnesses said, it would be easier if the law was amended so people can easily access their AVCs, because if that was the case, people would be more incentivized to input inside it as opposed to locking it away. So again, these are the kind of stuff that we expected to get from these forums. And for me, the last 3 days have actually been quite educational in that regard, in terms of some things that we know we need to deal with. As with any legislation, and that's why you do have amendments, you start off with one thing. Over 20 years ago, it was one intention, but that's what the market was. Since then, we have had the 2008 financial crisis. We have had this, we have had a few little knee jerks along the way. So this is our chance to look back and say, well, what it is that we can do different. And the advantages with using even this forum is that sometimes even when you do have a public discussion, people are even fearful to put their own opinion out there because they may say the wrong thing and someone sues them. Whereas sitting inside here, it actually comes with all the different immunity that way you can speak frankly and not have to worry about, well, someone suing you or anything like that. So it is from that standpoint and it's from that culture where I think ultimately where we as the Cayman Islands and our people has evolved to the point now where we need to start having more of these open dialogue to some extent, where we can ventilate some of these issues, because ultimately that's what we're here for. I mean, we're still a nation of laws. I give you a perfect example. Even during this crisis, late one night I wanted to look at a particular law. I went looking for it online and I couldn't find it. And then I started searching, and I'm like, wait a minute, I can't find the laws. So now as a result, just from even coming to this crisis, I end up filing a motion basically saying all the laws should be online and all of them should be free. Because you can't sit back and expect to govern a country with laws, but the people have access to the very laws in which they're being governed by. So these are the kind of stuff naturally that we evolve in this process. And as we evolve as a people, so our democratic function would also evolve too. And ultimately, that's where we're looking to get to. But at the end of the day, we all serve the same people. So, and that's really the purpose of it. But the regulators have a job to do, but we also have a job to make sure the regulators do their job. And if you want to do a 360 evaluation, then you also have to bring in the people that the regulators look at.
Well, I was going to say, sir, that there is also, this is not a unique situation. I know that the Office of Pensions in the UK had a quite depth study done on the way that they were managing and how they were managing and what tools they need to put in place. Because one of the things that the Director of Pensions Office has always indicated is basically do not have the appropriate level of resources. Now, I work in a technology field, so I can tell you that you can use technology to make up for some of those disadvantages. But you also have to have the commitment from the top to ensure that it's put in place. Because we can go back and look at some of these things about different things that we're going to be put in, and you read report after report after report that is not completed. So it's fair enough, but we also, even the law you were talking about, that law that you're talking about is not yet implemented. That took almost 2 years of man-hours of people coming in and talking, discussing, and so forth to get even to that. And I will tell you that there's still probably 20 or 30% where you have two different answers, and they decide, well, this was the better answer, but the other one could have been just as good, or it may have been just as poor. So it's never going to be perfect. The regulators, there is also, like SEMA gets reviewed, I think, by, again, I'm going to talk out of turn, by obviously international organizations as well. So there may be similar types of organizations that can be done for the pension, so that the country can get an independent evaluation, not from internally. And a lot of the Banana Republic people like to say, because you know this one and that one, you get past colors and so forth. If you're bringing in international people or people on the island who are not or who are independent and not involved in a then they can also provide you the type of comfort that you're looking for as well.
This committee, you know, we say that we wanted this to be collaborative, but hopefully as we move forward, we never have to get to where we're in an adversarial position. But I can promise you that if we need to do that, we're
Well, no,
quite comfortable in that role.
Yeah, but having said that, if the member says you want to do this preliminary work, so you never get to that point.
Exactly.
But if
That's
you
the point.
wait till you get to it, then the cost becomes maybe prohibitive.
Yep.
And also, it is so detrimental to the whole process that you're trying to collapse. I mean, there was a discussion at one point where the Department of Labor and Apprentices was actually going to be within SEMA. Now, that never did happen. I don't know the reasons behind it, know what the politics were and so forth and so on, but there's always been sort of that process, because by being by themselves, they're going to have to put more infrastructure in place that they don't have sort of backup for.
Anyway, just so that you don't lose your silver slipper, we're gonna let you out before your time. Thank you very much for coming, sir. We'll appreciate it, and we appreciate your input. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, glass up there. But you see, I didn't want to make it glass so they would know what I was talking about. I said silver. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned until you get notice from me to come back.